Thank you very much. We gather here today as members of a historic alliance, an alliance that saved and changed the world. You know, when this conference began in 1963, it was in a nation, actually it was on a continent, that was divided against itself. The line between communism and freedom ran through the heart of Germany. The first barbed fences of the Berlin Wall had gone up just 2 years prior. And just months before that first conference, before our predecessors first met here in Munich.
I think it's interesting how he says communism and freedom.
Yeah.
He won't say capitalism. So he's sidestepping that, and we'll see if later in the speech he does. I don't recall seeing him use the word capitalism, but communism and freedom. That is, communism means lack of freedom, and capitalism is freedom. So just an interesting point in passing that he could not be brazen enough to use that word. How do we continue? I'll just sit down like that.
The Cuban Missile Crisis had brought the world to the brink of nuclear destruction.
Obviously very familiar with the Cuban Missile.
Even as World War II still burned fresh in the memory of Americans and Europeans alike, we found ourselves staring down the barrel of a new global catastrophe, one with the potential for a new kind of destruction, more apocalyptic and final than anything before in the history of mankind. The time of that first gathering, Soviet communism was on the march. Thousands of years of Western civilization hung in the balance.
What is
At that time,
this Munich Security Conference? I've never really heard of this.
I haven't heard of it either, but it seems it began in 1963, according to this. So we are now in the 63rd year of the Munich Security Conference, but it seems it was formed after the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. So,
and Munich obviously would have been, maybe I shouldn't say obviously, but part of West Germany.
West Germany,
at the time,
yes, that's correct. Yeah,
the
which was the
free world
right
side, yeah.
Because that was, and that of course was the irony, was that the Soviet Union, which essentially fought and won the Second World War, had to end up splitting or sharing Germany with the US and England primarily, who came in at the last minute in 1944, in the last year, when Germany was all but vanquished by the Soviet sacrifice of 27 million people, and managed to cling onto their foothold, their beachhead on the continent.
victory was far from certain. But we were driven by a common purpose. We were unified not just by what we were fighting against. We were unified by what we were fighting for. And together, Europe and America prevailed. And a continent was rebuilt. Our people prospered. In time, the East and West blocks were reunited. A civilization was once again made whole. That infamous wall that had cleaved this nation into two came down, and with it an evil empire. And the East and West became one again. But the euphoria of this triumph led us to a dangerous delusion that we had entered, quote, the end of history, that every nation would now be a liberal democracy, that the ties formed by trade and by commerce alone would now replace nationhood, that the rules-based global order, an overused term, would now replace the national interest, and that we would now live in a world without borders where everyone became a citizen of the world. This was a foolish idea that ignored both human nature and it ignored the lessons of over 5,000 years of recorded human history. And it has cost us dearly. In this delusion, we embraced a dogmatic vision of free and unfettered trade, even as some nations protected their economies and subsidized their companies to systematically undercut ours, shuttering our plants, resulting in large parts of our societies being deindustrialized, shipping.
Yeah, what's up with the anti-free trade rhetoric? Of course, it's very he's kind of like, I'm sure the countries he's referencing are France, England, Japan to some extent, Germany certainly, especially after reunifying.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's kind of weird because on the one hand you're saying
Millions of working.
How do I make it so you're showing?
Oh, we're still, people can still see us, but
okay,
on the other tab. But
okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird to go to this kind of. That's why the name of this conference, a security conference, as opposed to like we were saying Davos, which is oriented around economic policy, and the people there are more overtly, definitely free trade kind of people, CEOs and stuff.
Yeah, that's the transnational bourgeoisie.
Yeah. This seems a lot more in line with the kind of even what he was saying, right? Oh, we were all going to be liberal democracies, which he's kind of denouncing. Of course, Marco Rubio always fixated on denouncing Cuba, and the fact that he started off with the Cuban Missile Crisis very much targeted kind of reference as this big moment. But yeah, he's on the other hand kind of not striking a very Reagan-esque, line. He's not doing the tear down this wall. Like in some ways, he's kind of saying, well, we in line with the Trump stuff, like part of our flaw in the aftermath, which I'm sure he's going to get to post Cold War geopolitics, but he's almost saying, we were too interested in liberalization. We were too, trying to create all these free trade arrangements, while all these other countries were, China also being referenced there, allowed to develop, protect their industries to some extent. So yeah, it's a kind of not the end of history, post Cold War style rhetoric. It's a little bit more, the decline of America is clear, and so we need actually to kind of go back to some of these Cold War style politics of as much as they were possible. Even someone like Kennedy, who was a liberal, was still kind of going out and calling for more, interventionist style politics, and going and doing the Bay of Pigs, which Marco Rubio is probably a fan of, and probably friends with a lot of the veterans of the Bay of Pigs who still gather frequently in South Florida and have, meetings to celebrate themselves and that kind of stuff. So this is for me much more of that kind of security nationalistic. He isn't there to go, and I'm sure he will gesture towards European. And I think this is one of the headlines I saw from this speech, even though it's my first time watching it, is like Rubio strikes more, he struck more of a open and inclusive tone between European and US collaboration, which I'm sure he's going to get to because he's talking about the Christian world, the free world, all that stuff. But he's also kind of saying part of our failure was to, kind of him calling out countries protecting their industry is saying we should, we were looking to have more like NATO, stronger.
Well, I think his,
kind of,
in a way, it's an anti-NATO speech
Yeah.
in the sense that NATO was essentially all of Europe under a U.S. umbrella. That is, the U.S. was taking care of security. You people just are our vassal states. And essentially what he's saying is everybody, and this is the Trump doctrine, everybody has to pitch in. Everybody's paying their own way. We're no longer going to take care of it all. You guys also have to pitch in and be part of it. So in a way, even though he's striking one tone to say, oh, we're, as you're going to see more, that we're all out of the European cradle, out of the Christian cradle, out of the capitalist cradle of Europe. That is, the U.S. is essentially the offspring, the extension of Europe into the Western Hemisphere, and therefore we're all family, but you guys have to pay your way. We're not footing the bill anymore. To me, that's the essence of his message. Anyway, we'll continue. Okay.
Middle-class jobs overseas and handing control of our critical supply chains to both adversaries and rivals. We increasingly outsourced our sovereignty to international institutions while many nations invested.
Yeah,
we can
right.
For like asides and stuff, we can kind of let it go and
right, an adversary and a rival. But I think what he means is an adversary, or Russia, China primarily. He's talking to China, but rivals, I think he's talking about among each other, among the Europeans.
And massive welfare states at the cost of maintaining the ability to defend themselves. This, even as other countries have invested in the most rapid military buildup in all of human history and have not hesitated to use hard power to pursue their own interests. To appease a climate cult, we have imposed energy policies on ourselves that are impoverishing our people, even as our competitors exploit oil and coal and natural gas and anything else, not just to power their economies, but to use as leverage against our own. And in a pursuit of a world without borders, we opened our doors to an unprecedented wave of mass migration that threatens the cohesion of our societies, the continuity of our culture, and the future of our people.
Yeah.
We made these mistakes.
Well, Marco Rubio, as the descendant of Cubans who came in the past, literally past 50,
century.
60 years,
Yeah, what are you talking about? You're an American, and what are you talking about for Europe? I mean, are you unaware, Marco Rubio, that Spain was basically part of Africa for much of its history, and that the history of Europe is one of empires conquering, coming in, going out, everybody from the East and as well as from the West. Yeah. So this is just totally a historical rendition out of some, I don't know, children's book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mistakes together. And now together we owe it to our people to face those facts and to move forward, to rebuild. Under President Trump, the United States of America will once again take on the task of renewal and restoration, driven by a vision of a future as proud, as sovereign, and as vital as our civilization's past. And while we are prepared, if necessary, to do this alone, it is our preference and it is our hope to do this together with you, our friends here in Europe. For the United States and Europe, we belong together. America was founded 250 years ago, but the roots began here on this continent long before. The man who...
So this is the suck up to Europe.
Yeah.
Come with us. We're your child. We're your extension. Our roots are here.
Who settled and built the nation of my birth, arrived on our shores carrying the memories and the traditions and the Christian faith of their ancestors as a sacred inheritance.
In many ways,
an unbreakable...
I kind of like him just there referencing America as this nation of immigrants, right? The same kind of, you know, the like the city on a shining hill speech,
Mm-hmm.
where I in some ways, like, I think that itself, to me, I would identify that as a liberal rhetoric, and liberal and maybe more of, I don't know, the American political sense, which tends to be about like cultural, historical, um, revisionism and exceptionalism for America. But he's totally doing that in this whole little, you know,
Segment.
Jeremiah about American history, while also having literally just said that was the root of our problems, was
Mhm.
that we opened our borders up too much
And let too many people
we
in.
let
Yeah.
too many people in. Now it's changing our culture, this
Yeah.
mass migration. So it's kind of funny to look at, on the one hand, oh, all these things are what made America, and we think America either was great, has always been great, whatever. But then on the other hand, this is kind of the root of our decline is starting here in its foundation. But so then how, like, why are you wanting to reclaim that, or
Mhm.
go out and kind of try to justify that? And his whole political career has been using that and instrumentalizing that fact to advance himself, especially in a place like Florida, where he was running against, it was either Chris Christie or Bill Nelson, or I think it was Chris Christie. No, not Chris Christie.
Chris Christie's New Jersey.
Yeah. What
Rick
was that
Scott?
guy's name? No, he wasn't running against Rick Scott. It was I can't remember his name
Yeah.
right now, but he's totally using, well, either he will say it or not, but what
He was using his Cuban
identity
roots.
politics and
Mhm.
the Miami base and stuff. So then to kind of come up and say, well, actually, that's for me and not for the kind of policy. And that isn't for me to come up.
You mean he was trying to say, I'm a Latino and I represent
right.
better Florida
Always
than you gringos?
Going to use identity politics and then say we don't like identity politics. And that's not me saying that I think actually that rhetoric could be used better, or like, in some different way, because I actually don't like going out. I don't want to go out and say, which is one of the failing points for a lot of the left, I think, is that they're trying to go and say, well, immigrants are welcome here. A lot of the anti-ICE movement has been about that. Like, America is a nation of immigrants. That's a big talking point to go against Trump and that stuff. And for me, it's like, well, these people will say that for sure to justify it themselves, and to say that's what makes America great, is that all these Europeans, we were where refugees were allowed to come, fleeing political, religious persecution, and they made this country these industrious people. And I think, to even try to rekindle that in any way is to get, into this exceptionalist stuff that always just harkens back to, Europeans. And it doesn't, I think this is a little more obvious, but it doesn't, he's not going to make any reference to Native Americans or anything.
Or to African Americans.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to hear he's going to say it was the Germans who basically created our farmland.
Link between the old world and the new. We are part of one civilization, Western civilization. We are bound to one another by the deepest bonds that nations could share, forged by centuries of shared history, Christian faith, culture, heritage, language, ancestry, and the sacrifice.
What language?
Yeah.
What language? You had French, you had English, you had Spanish, you had Italian.
For me, there was this really telling incident with Marco Rubio. I think it was right when he got inaugurated as Secretary of State, where he got up and he was thanking the senators and stuff when he was confirmed.
Mm.
And he was introducing himself, and he actually said part of his introduction in
In
Spanish.
Spanish. There you go.
And then he immediately, this is a little more maybe Freudian or psychoanalytic, but he immediately said he said stuff in Spanish, and then he said, and for those who don't speak Spanish, I was just saying, I'm happy to have my car insurance from State Farm. He made like this quip, which is kind of the reaction of basically saying, you know, I'm apologizing for speaking in my native language. I'm actually so deferent to the English audience here that I don't want to make it seem as though something I could have a thought in another language outside of English that's like worth, you know, a real sincere thought, or I would really sincerely express myself in the language you grew up speaking in South Florida. So that was very telling for me that he is sort of self-hating in a lot of ways. He, as much as he's going to appeal to his identity for political capital
An advancement.
yeah, once he's got now this office, maybe we'll try to run for president, but I don't know. But either way, sort of, you know, constantly apologizing for this other side of himself, which is really, I mean, more, maybe we would say more like actually authentic to where you grew up and the people in your family than this like Anglo, you know, political culture that you're trying to ingratiate yourself into.
Especially with this speech, yeah.
Absolutely. With this so far, you know, is just kind of like this suck up to the Europeans, as you said.
Yeah.
And so you can't take out the context of his background, who he is, hearing that was very sad. It sounded like, you know, in a way, like listening to a student or something who is like ashamed to speak their language, their home language, or is code switching in a school environment to try and not get rid of their accent, all this stuff to try to fit into specifically Anglo. I'm not saying that happens everywhere, because a lot of times people can feel comfortable if they're in a place that can enable them. But here in the White House with Trump there and with whoever else was there, he obviously felt the need to, am I using the word genuflect?
Yeah,
correctly?
genuflect
Yeah,
is
it's
to
kind of just-
bow, kneel to.
Absolutely. You know,
Yeah.
Like I was just selling insurance. Haha. I wasn't, you know, really,
Yeah, he's
playing the court jester.
Yep.
Our forefathers made together for the common civilization to which we have fallen heir. And so this is why we Americans may sometimes come off as a little direct and urgent in our counsel. This is why President Trump demands seriousness and reciprocity from our friends here in Europe.
Reciprocity demands you to pay up.
The reason why, my friends, is because we care
It
deeply.
reminds me of, he's almost like in The Godfather. He's kind of like the character
The Robert
played by
Duvall.
Robert Duvall.
Yeah, the lawyer. He's Trump's lawyer.
He's Trump's lawyer.
We care deeply about your
More-
future and ours.
Kind
More
of,
articulate voice.
yeah, than the Don.
Yeah.
And if at times we disagree, our disagreements come from our profound sense of concern about a Europe with which we are connected, not just economically, not just militarily. We are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally.
Spiritually and culturally.
Yeah.
There goes the melting pot. It's European. We're Europeans here.
But,
We want Europe to be
That's super counter to what a lot of these people would say is like real politics, that actually, like, that is pure identity politics. There's certainly no economic, even though he said, oh, we have trade and whatever and security and stuff, but to go and say, you know, what really connects us is some spiritual,
Our spirit and culture,
Yeah.
not our economy and military alliance. Yeah.
strong. We believe that Europe must survive. Because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours. Because we know that the fate of Europe will never be irrelevant to our own. National security, which this conference is largely about, is not merely a series of technical questions. How much we spend on defense or where, how we deploy it, these are important questions. They are. But they are not the fundamental one. The fundamental question we must answer at the outset is, what exactly are we defending? Because armies do not fight for abstractions. Armies fight for a people. Armies fight for a nation. Armies fight for a way of life. And that is what we are defending.
Abstractions. There again, it's the avoiding capitalism. Armies don't fight to preserve the capitalist system. They prefer, it's for a nation, which is separate, a people, which is separate, a way of life, which is separate. All this dancing around, saying we are the last bastion. This is the Alamo of capitalism.
A great civilization that has every reason to be proud of its history, confident of its future, and aims to always be the master of its own economic and political destiny. It was here, in Europe, where the ideas that planted the seeds of liberty that changed the world were born. It was here, in Europe.
Here in Europe, the seeds of liberty, it all came out. Civilization didn't start in Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and the Euphrates, or in Africa, or where mathematics were imported northward through Egypt to Europe, or China, where dynamite and writing, or it all happened in Europe. I mean, it's just unspeakably, moronically simplistic and false.
This very much fits into from a Marxist point of view, is very much an idealist. One of the
an obfuscationist,
idealist philosophical perspective, because even him saying, well, really, even if what he means to say, or what is kind of underneath what he's saying, is we in America actually are the ones who fight for liberty and advance liberty. You in Europe, even though you've been
freeloading on us,
with your welfare states, and
he's going to come to that in a minute.
I'm sure, but he's kind of saying, well, what really matters for us, which is from this idealistic or historic, philosophically idealist point of view, is that we had these important ideas come from people like David Ricardo, Adam Smith, of free trade, comparative advantage, whatever. And what really was important was that those people came up with some of the rhetorical and philosophical justifications for slavery, for colonialism, that we could then in America actually institute a lot of those systems economically. But we appreciate that those ideas, which are, again, we're looking at it in a Marxist way, just the intellectual justifications for the, as you said, the economic, the arrangement of productive relations that is what has united Europe and America actually historically over time, is imperialism and
the highest stage of capitalism,
and the slavery mode of production, for sure. So for him to be saying that is to say we can appropriate those ideas and use them for our economic advancement, as America did over time. And we appreciate that we are aware of the provenance of those ideas, but we're also kind of chastising Europe for allowing America to or forcing, our hand was forced to go, be create manifest destiny and go and imperialize the world and have to take over as the world's largest imperialist power, where Europe has kind of lagged behind because it has focused so much on whatever he's going to say is the root of European malaise. So yeah, that's a very again, just he's trying to mimic the industriousness that he sees as like the good side of European culture and economics, but actually
the supposed Protestant work ethic.
The Protestant work ethic for sure. Is he Catholic?
Where the world,
I'm sure he's Catholic.
He's probably Catholic,
which gave the world the rule of law, the universities, and the
They gave the world the rule of law. There was no law anywhere until Europe came along, and there were no universities.
scientific revolution. It was this continent.
The scientific
produced-
revolution, Chinese came up with dynamite. Just it was a mistake, and the Africans invented mathematics by mistake.
The genius of Mozart and Beethoven, of Dante and Shakespeare, of Michelangelo and Da Vinci, of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And this is the place where the vaulted ceilings of the Sistine Chapel and the towering spires of the great cathedral in Cologne, they testify not just to the greatness of our past or to a faith in God that inspired these marvels. They foreshadow the wonders that await us in our future.
That much?
Well, the marvel of the cathedrals. Right. He's talking about the cathedral in Cologne, or I don't know. He leaves out Notre Dame, maybe purposefully. But, I mean, this is just the most obsequious suck buddy speech I ever heard.
But only if we are unapologetic in our heritage and proud of this common inheritance can we together begin the work of envisioning and shaping our economic and our political future. Deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decades-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence. And the loss of our supply chain sovereignty was not a function of a prosperous and healthy system of global trade.
Again, it's just deindustrialization was just a policy choice. Mm-hmm. It wasn't an imperative of capitalism seeking the cheapest labor possible. It was just a policy choice, which was a mistake.
It was foolish. It was a foolish but voluntary transformation of our economy that left us dependent on others for our needs and dangerously vulnerable to crisis. Mass migration isn't some fringe concern of little consequence. It was and continues to be a crisis which is transforming and destabilizing societies all across.
Mass migration, which made the U.S. The mass migration, which happened, relatively speaking, mostly in the 19th and early 20th century. It's so preposterous, the whole speech.
Across the West. Together, we can reindustrialize our economies and rebuild our capacity to defend our people. But the work of this new alliance should not be focused just on military cooperation and reclaiming the industries of the past. It should also be focused on together advancing our mutual interests in new frontiers, unshackling our ingenuity, our creativity, and the dynamic spirit to build a new Western century. Commercial space travel and cutting-edge artificial intelligence, industrial automation and flex manufacturing, creating a Western supply chain for critical minerals not vulnerable to extortion from other powers, and a unified effort to compete for market share in the
extortion. I mean, it's amazing. The biggest extorters, the biggest extortionate empire of all time is accusing other nations of extortion.
Economies of the global South. Together, we can not only take back control of our own industries and supply chains, we can prosper in the areas that will define the 21st century. But we must also gain control of our national borders. Controlling who and how many people enter our countries, this is not an expression of xenophobia. It is not hate. It is a fundamental act of national sovereignty. And the failure to do
you would have to really look at how much double speak or kind of, need to justify your perspective if every other sentence has to be, well, I'm not being racist, or I'm
Xenophobic.
not being xenophobic actually. So there's again kind of a admission of guilt in there. If you feel, I don't think in this audience anybody is particularly, especially the way European governments have always been and are kind of especially now, very susceptible to this rhetoric. In France, Macron versus Le Pen on this topic is not a gulf of difference, and Brexit, was in a lot of ways caused by some of this stuff. So he's kind of preaching to the choir. So, but I find it interesting that he nevertheless feels the need to say, "Well, I'm not xenophobic," and it's totally justified and fair for us to control who comes into the country and how many. But who was anybody in his family going to be saying after 1959? I think we need to really be seriously concerned about who's getting into America, how many of them are coming in, in what fashion are they coming in, as they're getting their passports ready at the control in Miami to come in and continue their enterprises, which Castro had been rightfully you know identifying as parasitic to Cuba. And so now I think a lot of that activity, as you were saying, drug trafficking and stuff, which is they're enabled to continue in South Florida because it's advantageous to U.S. global policy directed against Cuba, but it isn't like itself productive to an economy to be a drug trafficker, or So yeah, it's kind of constantly just self-legitimating, but it isn't. I think that I would hope that there's some evidence of that kind of the turmoil that causes psychologically to have to be going up and saying, this is the biggest problem. But I'm not xenophobic. I can't be xenophobic.
Yeah. We're just defending our sovereignty, and we're so interested in sovereignty as we go invading nations everywhere and making war against them in the form of sanctions and blockades as well.
Do so is not just an abdication of one of our most basic duties owed to our people. It is an urgent threat to the fabric of our societies and the survival of our civilization itself. And finally, we can no longer place the so-called global order above the vital interests of our people and our nations. We do not need to abandon the system of international cooperation we authored, and we don't need to dismantle the global institutions of the old order that together we built. But these must be reformed. These must be rebuilt. For example, the United Nations still has tremendous potential to be a tool for good in the world. But we cannot ignore that today, on the most pressing matters before us, it has no answers and has played virtually no role. It could not solve the war in Gaza. Instead, it was American leadership.
And why was that? And that wasn't because American leadership made that impossible, vetoing resolution after resolution, and in the end, basically taking over Gaza as part of this so-called peace council that Trump is president of life for. Is president for life of.
That freed captives from barbarians and brought about a fragile truce.
Barbarians. The Palestinians are barbarians there.
It has not solved the war in Ukraine. It took American leadership in partnership with many of the countries here today just to bring the two sides to the table in search of a still elusive peace. It was powerless.
Like a false memory that I'm having as we're kind of doing this, reflecting on this media, but I feel like I've actually heard Marco Rubio speak in person, and I think the context of that was either in 2016 or 2017. I can't remember exactly. I'm almost positive that it was at University of Florida in Gainesville, and it was a debate tournament. I'm pretty sure it was. It could have been. I did both debate and Model United Nations in high school.
Okay.
Him, for whatever reason, whatever he just said there, I was like, whoa, I've heard this.
This line of attack before.
Yeah, I've heard like his cadence and his kind of like rhythm of politician speaking before. Now, I can't really tell you that I remember anything from his speech at the time, which probably was, and I could almost, it would be fun to go and fact check this with friends of mine from high school who may also remember this or maybe not. But I'm almost certain if we tried to piece together our memory from this time, they would always have some Florida politician come speak. And at the end of these tournaments, especially if it was the debate one, which was a lot more kind of high profile, it was the big Florida circuit of young high school debaters. And they would have like a keynote at the end to wrap up, which these are almost they're competitions, but they're kind of like conferences like this. And yeah, something about his oratory, which is so from 2016 around that time.
10 years ago.
This would have been after he ran for president, because the year I was a freshman in high school was Trump had already won by that point, and he had ended his campaign already by like 2015. But yeah, I'm kind of like having this flashback to almost 100% sure that he was like someone that I've seen talk, but I don't know. Yeah, I'd have to call a friend and be like, hey, am I having a false memory of this? But
is Rubio retreading some of his old talking points?
To constrain the nuclear program of radical Shia clerics in Tehran, that required 14 bombs dropped with precision from American B-2 bombers. And it was unable to address the threat to our security from a narco-terrorist dictator in Venezuela. Instead, it took American special...
Unbelievable. Narco-terrorist dictator. That is...
forces to bring this fugitive to...
His rhetoric is very much rehashed over time from like in the time in 2018, would have been a sophomore in high school, and there were rallies around at FIU with Juan Guaido, and he was striking a very similar tone as the senator from Florida at this point.
Justice. In a perfect world, all of these problems and more would be solved by diplomats and strongly worded resolutions.
We don't live in a perfect world.
But we do not live in a perfect world. And we cannot continue to allow those who blatantly and openly threaten our citizens and endanger our global stability to shield themselves behind abstractions of international law, which they
flaw in a lot of what he said, which is the our and the we, where you're at a foreign conference, and probably a lot of Americans, even those who may agree with some of this stuff, are gonna, and this was something we have touched on a little bit, which was that Rubio, I think from like 2016 and around that time, was seen as part of the globalist faction that Trump was very much ostensibly opposed to. And for him to get up at a speech in Munich and say, our citizens, like, we are abdicating our responsibility, doesn't make Americans say, well, like, again, in line with a lot of the early Trump domestic or foreign policy, we don't really care about NATO or Ukraine or heck, even Iran and the protests and stuff. We care about, uh, what's happening domestically. So I think Rubio gets seen as kind of an imposter in a lot of ways, rightfully so, probably because some of this stuff is like not in the America First.
Right. He is an
agenda.
imposter. No, he's a complete, he's essentially the globalists' mole in
Yeah.
the MAG, even though Trump has himself been completely captured,
Yeah.
if he ever wasn't captured.
Yeah, I think the logical progression from the first term of Trump to now has been the stuff against Venezuela, the stuff
Yeah.
against Cuba. Because in his first term, he didn't seem to really care about that stuff that much.
Mhm.
And Ukraine was the big thing in the impeachment that he didn't. The Democrats tried to impeach him on the basis of he
Not
didn't
not
care
shipping
enough
guns to
about
he didn't ship
Ukraine.
guns to Ukraine. Yeah.
So now it's very funny that he would
Yeah.
be saying, we in our, in Germany, right, one of the larger caring about Israel and caring about Ukraine nations, that we have all this collective responsibility. He's right that many people will feel that solidarity. A lot of, certainly, white Americans will sympathize with Ukraine, absolutely, and their fellow Europeans and stuff, but it doesn't rhetorically match with the policies which are supposed to be about America first, and
Mhm. Yeah.
themselves routinely violate. This is the path that President Trump and the United States has embarked upon. It is the path we ask you here in Europe to join us on. It is a path we have walked together before and hope to walk together again. For 5
that's
centuries
the head of NATO.
before the end of the Second World War, the
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
it looks like that.
West had been expanding. Its missionaries, its pilgrims, its soldiers, its explorers pouring out from its shores to cross oceans, settle new continents, build vast empires extending out across the globe. But in 1945, for the first time since the age of Columbus,
Vanderleyen, or
Yeah.
What is
No, that's the World Bank lady.
yeah. What's her
It's escaping me right now, but yeah, she's the. But I mean, it's again like these empires were great things.
Yeah.
They were so wonderful for humanity. They didn't wreak holocaust, havoc, destroy civilizations.
How else could pilgrims travel on boats
Yeah,
around the world?
yeah. They didn't put their vanquished Native Americans' heads on stakes around their foot. I mean, it's just the most barbarous period of human history in many ways is, or at least in terms of size, is, now great.
Which I think a lot of these Europeans there in the audience and stuff, they themselves are not even necessarily, other than what NATO affords to maybe France and the UK as kind of these former empires which
Mhm.
were supplanted. What do they care? And even if we are going back to this time period, why they were the ones persecuting these so-called pilgrims,
Mhm.
and
Right.
they were
The pilgrims were fleeing them.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, why
Yeah.
what is the basis of this solidarity that he's talking about? He made a great point of going through how it's a musical solidarity that we all share. We have Mozart, and we have the Sistine Chapel, and
And the Rolling Stones.
and the Rolling Stones, which is this kind of collective unity that he's talking to actually more about European racial
Cultural
unity,
yeah.
and I mean, because otherwise it doesn't seem like there is really a basis for any you know, agreement if you did have all these great people that he's talking about being chased out of Europe and being seen for a long time. I mean, let's not forget the American Revolution as a internal conflict, as a civil conflict between Europeans.
Yeah.
So let's reclaim that and gesture to a pan-Europeanism. That was again the headline that I was seeing come out of this, which the deliverer of the message is very much personally invested in that project. I think that the people there, as you know, heads of European governments, are also invested in it, either because NATO affords again a lot of can deal with a lot of the security concerns and stuff, and they do personally have a lot at stake in Ukraine. They are invested in that conflict and stuff. The cultural stuff, I'm sure they Europhiles for Beethoven and whatever, sure. But I don't think that historically there is a, you know, there is like certainly a beautiful revisionist history you can gesture towards that can omit a lot of intra-European conflict if you want to have that narrative, which is great. You can have that, as you said, children's book fantasy. And now the way it's playing out can absolutely be true, but it does omit that there were conflicts between Pied Noir in Algeria trying to assassinate Charles de Gaulle for pursuing rapprochement with the FLN. All these, you know, white South Africans trying to, support Hitler over, the Allies in World War II. All these actual tensions that did happen that he's kind of conveniently, I mean, the American Revolution is kind of one of the bigger ones there, but he's kind of conveniently just, we just shared a lot of things in common, and those are the more, we should just focus on that and not,
Well, it's a real, and I could even say it's almost a desperate speech in that he sees Europe, really even since Davos, turning to China, turning to the East, turning to India and China, two great engines of the world economy. We could say the principal motors of the world economy. And he's saying, no, we're a team, we're a family, we're all bound. Don't look east, look west. We're the Western world. This is the world of the fairy tale that I'm telling.
It was contracting. Europe was in ruins. Half of it lived behind an iron curtain, and the rest looked like it would soon follow. The great Western empires had entered into terminal decline, accelerated by godless communist revolutions.
Godless communists. And this is one thing we were saying before. This is really, communism is back. This is an anti-communist speech, which we haven't seen for quite a while, because communism was really since 91, 92, was seen as vanquished. But now suddenly communism is back.
we have to
unmute.
In the world and drape the red hammer and sickle across vast swaths of the map in the years to come. Against that backdrop, then as now, many came to believe that the West's age of dominance had come to an end, and that our future was destined to be a faint and feeble echo of our past. But together, our predecessors recognized that decline was a choice, and it was a choice they refused to make. This is what we did together once before. And this is what President Trump and the United States want to do again now, together with you. And this is why we do not want our allies to be weak, because that makes us weaker. We want allies who can defend themselves so that no adversary will ever be tempted to test our collective strength. This is why we do not want our allies to be shackled by guilt and shame. We want allies who are proud of their culture, and of their heritage, who understand that we are heirs to the same great and noble civilization, and who together with us are willing and able to defend it. And this is why we do not want allies to rationalize the broken status quo rather than reckon with what is necessary to fix it. For we in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline. We do not seek to separate, but to revitalize an old friendship and renew the greatest civilization in human history. What we want is a reinvigorated alliance that recognizes that what has ailed our societies is not just a set of bad policies, but a malaise of hopelessness and complacency. An alliance is the alliance that we want is one that is not paralyzed into inaction by fear. Fear of climate change, fear of war, fear of technology. Instead, we want an alliance that boldly races into the future. And the only fear we have is the fear of the shame of not leaving our nations prouder, stronger, and wealthier for our children. An alliance ready to defend our people, to safeguard our interests, and to preserve the freedom of action that allows us to shape our own destiny.
The freedom of action. That is, again, a key line, meaning our ability to intervene, to bomb, to sanction wherever we want. Just we want to scrap all international law, all codes of conduct, so we can just be the pirates and the masters of this universe.
To systems beyond its control, one that does not depend on others for the critical necessities of its national life, and one that does not maintain the polite pretense that our...
That's the key. That's talking to Europe again about dealing with China. Yeah. Don't get all your stuff from China.
And above all, an alliance based on the recognition that we, the West, have inherited together. What we have inherited together is something that is unique and distinctive and irreplaceable, because this, after all, is the very foundation of the transatlantic bond. Acting together in this way, we will not just help recover a sane foreign policy, it will restore to us a clear sense of ourselves. It will restore a place in the world. And in so doing, it will rebuke and deter the forces of civilizational erasure that today menace both America and Europe alike. So in a time of headlines...
I mean, that's pretty amazing. Civilizational erasure.
Yeah, that's him getting some of the, especially now...
that this is...
I think in European politics, they've been kind of getting the boomerang effect of culture war around migration that the U.S. has had for a longer time because of history and nature of U.S. politics and, the border and such. But I think for a long time, European societies were more homogenous to some extent. And of course, over time, they were getting more influenced, and this kind of feedback effect of radical, right-wing perspective on migration as all kinds of, talking points that he's using terms like malaise and erasure, as you just said, which is this like great replacement, white replacement, kind of stuff.
Right.
He's kind of referencing to. Again, I mean, I hate to really belabor this, but it's so interesting who is the one giving the speech, and that it isn't at a white supremacist forum with, Richard Spencer or one of these type of people saying some of this stuff about Western civilization and the counter
Christian values and blah, blah, blah.
Erasure is the alternative to that. It's the Secretary of State, and that he is, himself only kind of recently Americanized or recently, anglicized. And
we should say North Americanized.
Yeah, North Americanized is a better way to put it. So, he's latching on to some of these points, which are to like be successful in European politics now. And this has been shown in France, in the Netherlands, right? There's all kinds of latching on to what they maybe previously would have seen as, oh, that's American identity politics, and we don't do that. You know, we emphasize Frenchness as opposed to black and white and whatever. We emphasize this stuff. But I think as their own empires have receded and they themselves have been impacted by migration from, you know, the former colonies that previously they had kind of used this subjugation through direct colonialism, which again, America has had so much of that. The United States has officially had so much of that thought and policy because we went through our own process, but we had to, you know, label the Native Americans as the other and the barbarian and the heathen, even though they were indigenous.
And now today,
we had
Palestinians.
to make ourselves, we being again white Americans, I'm saying, as you know, but make us the indigenous one by saying that God gave us this land, and then you can make everybody else the heathen and whatnot. And I think Europeans are increasingly, who previously never had to justify their own indigeneity because it was just obvious, but now they increasingly have to say, well, yeah, we are the natural party and the you know, naturalize ourselves and all this stuff. So,
and what strikes me too is this speech is fundamentally a response to Carney, Carney's speech of Canada, because he was saying the old order that we had, we're not in a transition. This is a rupture. This hypocrisy, which we benefited from for so many years, the rules-based order, which was that we make the rules and they follow the orders. Now we are the victim of it, and it's not going to be any good. We don't want it. And so this is trying to repair that and say, listen, we're all together. The main thing is you got to pay your way. We're not paying for you anymore.
Neither our goal nor our wish. Because for us Americans, our home may be in the Western Hemisphere, but we will always be a child of Europe. Our story began with an Italian explorer whose adventure into the great unknown to discover a new world brought Christianity to the Americas and became the legend that defined the imagination of our pioneer nation. Our first colonies were built by English settlers, to whom we owe not just the language we speak, but the whole of our political and legal system.
That's a slight to the Dutch. That's a slight to the Spanish. That's, I mean, anyway, yeah.
Our frontiers were shaped by Scots-Irish, that proud, hardy clan from the hills of Ulster that gave us Davy Crockett and Mark Twain and Teddy Roosevelt and Neil Armstrong. Our great Midwestern heartland was built by German farmers and craftsmen who transformed.
I mean, what astonishing.
I think they all know this too. He doesn't need to like reiterate it for the audience.
No, but also just how and again, no mention of slave labor from Africa having built most of this country.
Empty plains into a global agricultural powerhouse. And by the way, dramatically upgraded the quality of American beer. Our expansion into the interior followed the footsteps of French fur traders and explorers whose names, by the way, still adorn the street signs and town names all across the Mississippi Valley. Our horses, our ranches, our rodeos, the entire romance of the cowboy archetype that became synonymous with the American West. These were born in Spain. And our largest and most iconic city was named New Amsterdam before it was named New York. And you know that in the year that my country was founded, Lorenzo and Catalina Giraldi lived in Casal Monferrato in the Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia. And Jose and Manuela Reina lived in Sevilla, Spain. I don't know what, if anything, they knew about the 13 colonies which had gained their independence from the British Empire. But here's what I'm certain of. They could have never imagined that 250 years later, one of their direct descendants would be back here today on this continent as the chief diplomat of that infant nation. And yet here I am, reminded by my own story that both our histories and our fates will always be linked. Together we rebuilt a shattered continent in the wake of 2 devastating world wars. When we found ourselves divided once again by the Iron Curtain, the Free West linked arms with the courageous dissidents struggling against tyranny in the East to defeat Soviet communism. We have fought against each other, then reconciled, then fought, then reconciled again. And we have bled and died side by side on battlefields from Kapyong to Kandahar. And I'm here today to leave it clear that America is charting the path for a new century of prosperity.
I don't know.
Maybe Vietnam.
Yeah.
And that once again, we want to do it together with you, our cherished allies and our oldest friends. We want to do it together with you, with a Europe that is proud of its heritage and of its history, with a Europe that has the spirit of creation and liberty that sent ships out into uncharted seas and birthed our civilization, with a Europe that has the means to defend itself and the will to survive. We should be proud of what we achieved together in the last century, but now we must confront and embrace the opportunities of a new one. Because yesterday is over. The future is inevitable. And our destiny together awaits. Thank you.
So in short, an anti-communist speech, maybe we should put our picture.
What is the rest of the speech?
Oh, I think it's questions. You want to do the questions?
Yeah. Who's the guy asking him questions?
I guess
Assurance
Let's see.
of partnership. You spoke of intertwined relations between the United States and Europe. Reminds me of statements made decades ago by your predecessors when the discussion was, is actually America a European power? Is America a power in Europe? Thank you for offering this message of reassurance about our partnership.
And I think that's the key thing. If you notice, all the applause from the audience came when he said, we're going to stick defending you. Because this is Europe's big worry, is that the U.S. is going to abandon it and take its umbrella away. And suddenly they're there without an umbrella to defend against Russia, as they see as their big threat. And I think that in many ways, this is just the timorous European masses applauding for his saying, you know, we're going to stand by you or stand over you if you accept to be under us and under our control. And again, that's the response to Carney, who was saying it's time for a rupture, we have to seek our own way. And he's saying, no, say it loud, I'm imperialist and I'm proud. And that's his message to them.
This is actually not the first time that Marco Rubio is here at the Munich Security Conference. He's been here before, a couple of times, but it's the first time he has been, and he is the speaker as Secretary of State. So thank you again. We have only a couple of minutes now for just a few questions. And if I may, we collected questions from the audience. One of the sort of key issues here yesterday, today, is of course, continues to be the question of how to deal with the war in Ukraine. Many of us in the discussions of the last day, last 24 hours, have voiced their impression that the Russians, let me put it colloquially, the Russians are...
And I think just at this point, we should stop to point again, they've avoided the whole question that this is essentially a discussion of capitalism versus communism. And we can say that Russia is the power it is today that so scares Europe because it had that 80 years of communism where they were able to accomplish in those 8 decades what it took capitalism to do over the course of 200 years. So this is, and China is, of course, even a more dramatic rise. So I think really this is the discussion of, we are the capitalisms of the world, and we are facing a world led by Russia and China, essentially, which is becoming more communist. And so really it strikes me so much in the speech how communism is back in the headlines, is back the concern.
Playing for time, they're not really interested.
Oh, and that Ukraine is the front line of that battle because Russia's power and dominance to shrug off the sanctions put by the US and Europe, by the capitalist countries against it, a sort of upstart capitalist country, if you will, to subdue it, have been just, in fact, strengthened it. They've begun to develop independence on every front, unlike the Europeans, and this makes the Ukraine really the line in the sand for Europe.
In a meaningful settlement, there is no indication that they're willing to compromise on any of their maximalist objectives. Offer to us, if you could, your assessment of where we are and where you think we can go.
Well, I think where we are at this point is that the issues at play that have to be, here's the good news. The good news is that the issues that need to be confronted to end this war have been narrowed. That's the good news. The bad news is they've been narrowed to the hardest questions to answer, and work remains to be done in that front. I hear your point about, well, the answer is we don't know. We don't know if the Russians are serious about ending the war. They say they are, and under what terms they were willing to do it, and whether we can find terms that are acceptable to Ukraine upon that Russia will always agree to. But we're going to continue to test it. In the meantime, everything else continues to happen. The United States has imposed additional sanctions on Russia's oil. In our conversations with India, we've gotten their commitment to stop buying additional Russian oil. Europe has taken its set of steps moving forward. The Pearl program continues, in which American weaponry is being sold for the Ukrainian war effort. So all these things continue. Nothing has stopped in the interim. So there's no buying of time here in that regard. What we can't answer, but we're going to continue to test, is whether there is an outcome that Ukraine can live with and that Russia will accept. And I would say it's been elusive up to this point. We've made progress in the sense that for the first time, I think, in years, at least at the technical level, there were military officials from both sides that met together last week, and there'll be meetings again on Tuesday, although it may not be the same group of people. Look, we're going to continue to do everything we can to play this role of bringing this war to the end. I don't think anybody in this room would be against a negotiated settlement to this war so long as the conditions are just and sustainable. And that's what we aim to achieve, and we're going to continue to try to achieve it, even as all these other things continue to happen on the sanctions front and so forth.
Thank you very much. I'm sure if we had more time, there would be many questions on Ukraine. But let me conclude by asking a question about something entirely different. The next speaker here in just a couple of minutes will be the Foreign Minister of China. When you served in the Senate, sir, people considered you a kind of a China hawk.
So did they.
So did they.
Yeah.
We know that there will be, in about 2 months' time, a summit meeting between President Trump and President Xi Jinping. Give us your expectation. Are you optimistic? Can there be a quote-unquote deal with China? What do you expect?
Well, I would say this. The two largest economies in the world, two of the big powers on the planet, we have an obligation to communicate with them and talk, and so do many of you on a bilateral basis as well. I mean, it would be geopolitical malpractice to not be in conversations with China. I would say this, because we're two large countries with huge global interests, our national interests will often not align. Their national interests and ours will not align, and we owe it to the world to try to manage those as best we can, obviously avoiding conflict, both economic and worse. And so it's important for us to have communications with them in that regard. On areas in which our interests are aligned, I think we can work together to make positive impact on the world, and we seek opportunities to do that with them. But we have to have a relationship with China, and many of the countries represented here today are going to have a relationship with China, always understanding that nothing that we agree to could come at the expense of our national interest. And frankly, we expect China to act in their national interest, as we expect every nation state to act in their national interest. And the goal of diplomacy is to try to navigate those times in which our national interests come into conflict with one another, always hoping to do it peacefully. I think we also have a special obligation, because whatever happens between the U.S. and China on trade has a global implication. So there are long-term challenges that we face that we're going to have to confront, that are going to be irritants in our relationship with China. That's not just true for the United States, that's true for the broader West. But I do think we need to try to manage those the best we can to avoid, unnecessary friction if it's possible. But no one is under any illusions. There are some fundamental challenges between our countries and between the West and China that will continue for the foreseeable future for a variety of reasons. And it's some of the things we hope to work together with you on.
Thank you very much.
So that was essentially an announcement of their weakness and vulnerability, saying we are not ready to challenge China's power, and you should not be either. That is, you are allowed, free, and probably should make your deals with China, make your arrangements with China. So after spending so much of his speech trying to demonize communism and explain that it was, sorry, what did I do now? Sorry, can you help me? I was trying to make it large for the screen. Okay, that's fine. So he is essentially trying to rationalize the weakness of the U.S., and we've already seen it where Trump was challenging China, and China said, okay, you do that, no more rare earths. And immediately they folded like a cheap suit and said, okay, sorry about that. Let's go back. So again, that's the push for Greenland. They're trying to take it. Trump is just flailing, and to some extent there is Marco Rubio too, with this big speech about we're the West, we're all together, we can do it ourselves, let's go alone, let's have our own force. And yet at the same time say, hey, we have to deal with China. You all have to deal with China, so let's realize it. Whether in his speech, he never spoke about the East at one point. It was always, we are the West, 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 we're together, stick together.
About going to Kandahar together.
Yeah, Kandahar together, right.
That's about as far east as you go.
And we have to respect sovereignty. There he was in the end. We have to respect sovereignty. Just the same way they're respecting Venezuela's sovereignty, they're respecting Cuba's sovereignty, they're respecting Haiti's sovereignty, they're respecting nobody's sovereignty, and yet they're respecting sovereignty.
I think as kind of a last word, we should always make the connection to Haiti, even if Haiti was not explicitly mentioned. I think that there's again, this kind of tone, which is, you could call it, American exceptionalism or the city on the hill type of thing, which he, especially in that just, cringeworthy moment where he's talking about himself being his ancestors' wildest
Yeah,
imagination.
right. Yeah.
Which is so, self-aggrandizing
Mhm.
and just nauseating. But this is the core of, the myth of what America can be. And I think it's important that you mention the North America, Americas, Latin America, Anglo America, these kind of contradictions, because in many ways the Haitian Revolution is, especially that it may have, come chronologically after the, American
13 colonies.
13 colonies thing, but it is in more ways kind of what people would consider in different forms rhetorically, again, talking about the first truly independent nation of the Americas, the first revolution in the Americas. I think
The first popular revolution,
Yeah.
because the American Revolution was just for
Yeah.
was not for black people, not for women, not
Yeah.
for even people who were not rich. It was for just the rich white planters of.
But I kind of think that, in some ways that rhetoric is good. In other ways, we have to be careful about getting into some of what this Rubio, and he is a very particular messenger to deliver that, because, as he stated, his particular heritage being Spanish and Italian, and then via Cuba. But the Haitian Revolution was so much more than just an American revolution. It had a lot more, and as beyond even just what you were mentioning of it being, whether it was popular and it was proletarian, but it was also connected to Africa in more ways than certainly the 13 colonies. So there's kind of there's a way of both claiming the new world, as he put it, a lot of ways, and you can do that without having to lapse into stuff about Christianity and Western civilization and classical music, right? All this kind of
Michelangelo,
this whitewashing of history.
Mhm.
I think that's especially true when we were kind of starting off talking about the unification of the Haitian Revolution, the parallels that exist between that and what is happening right now. And then Marco Rubio has been one of the most, declaring people, putting bounties out for people, and, talking, as he did in this speech, about the need for our basically unrestrained capacity to bomb whoever we want. And he had some line there about the well-placed bombs and stuff, which was just very
the
is that in the
14
same breath-
well-directed bombs onto Iran. Yeah.
Is that in the same breath as we're talking about classical music and the Sistine Chapel? I mean, so
And sovereignty.
ironic.
Yeah. And just to go a little bit into the details of the moment, we are in a, we might call it a calm before the storm, as we talked last week. Alex Didier-Fissimé is now the prime minister of Haiti, and that's the only official running the country, essentially. The Transitional Presidential Council, known as the CPT, has died and gone to hell. But the legal, because in Haiti everything has a certain formality, and even though it is completely trampled all the time, the Haitian Constitution, primarily right now, the fact that one of its key clauses said that there are no foreign troops ever to be allowed on Haiti, Haitian soil, but they used an Article 149, which says that when the presidency, even though this was completely concocted and presidency imported from Anthony Blinken into Haiti, this 9-headed monster that they created, that when the presidential power expires and there is no new elected president, the prime minister, which happened to be him appointed by this presidential council, has 3 months to hold elections. So they're using this 149 clause as some kind of very, very thin legal justification for Didier Fils-Aimé, Alex Didier Fils-Aimé, to remain in power. And he has begun some kind of negotiations, and this the analysis of our director Haiti, at Haiti Liberté, Bethany Dupont, with various political sectors, which they are going to have to make some kind of deal with them to be able to hold these elections, which will not happen in 3 months. That's just a logistical and political impossibility, even though they have kept what they call a provisional electoral council in place, which has called elections for August. So somehow the 3 months would bring the prime minister to May 7th, to be precise, February, March, April, May. That's 3 months. So he has to get from May another 3 months, June, July, August. So to get those additional 3 months, he's going to have to make some kind of political deal with sectors. Now his father, as we discussed in our last show, was a guy called Alex Fils-Aimé, who died a few years back, who was a close member of the René Préval clique, which involved not only himself, his nickname was Boulon, but the head of the police, a guy called Pierre, and again, his name's escaping me. I know his first name was Pierre, and as well as another advisor to Préval, whose name is also escaping me. So in any case, Bob Manuel, Boulon, René Préval, and Pierre, the police chief, were kind of a clique. And that was the core of what became a number of parties, one called Unité, one called L'Espoir, and another one, there was a third. So that sector is more or less the sector that is behind Fils-Aimé. It's kind of we can call it enlightened bourgeoisie, but they're sort of somewhere between the Montana and the Lavalas. Préval, again, was one of the architects of the Lavalas. He was the one, along with a couple of other bourgeois, who kind of pushed Aristide into that role. And he was, of course, Aristide's first prime minister. But so the Unité Espoir alliance is apparently already in some kind of dealings through a guy called Lambert, who is Joseph Lambert from Jacmel, who's a longtime political senator and political creature. There's Antonio Jérémy from Bel Air. Don Cateau is his name, also was a senator. So they are dealing with him, and they will try to make some kind of political alliance so he can bridge those 3 months. Now, in his speech, he said that he will remain as the prime minister until there are elections. So he doesn't say until May. He doesn't even say till August, which is when the KEP said. It could be, 3 Augusts from now or whatever, So in any case, they're leaving it very open-ended. And this is, again, part of the Trump-Rubio /world, which is we do whatever the hell we want. Screw international law, screw national laws. We don't respect any of that stuff. We just do whatever the hell we want. And this is true for Armenians too, like Alex Didier Fils-Aimé, whose sole power is coming from the Trump administration. He has no base in Haiti, other than the bourgeoisie.
On the note of remembering names, or having forgotten them. I earlier was saying Chris Christie for the guy who Marco Rubio ran against. I'm remembering his name is Charlie Crist. It's kind of similar
Charlie
to Chris
Crist.
Christie.
And I'm remembering the name of the police chief was Pierre Denizet.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, I mean,
Mhm.
Charlie Crist spelled like Christ, but
Yeah,
pronounced like
Chris
Christ,
Christie. Yeah.
is the guy who, and Chris Christie, is Italian American, but Charlie Crist in Florida is kind of part of this, like, the legacy of Florida as a political place in the U.S. beginning with like Andrew Jackson and going on, historically favored a lot of WASP, Floridian, being in the Senate and being governors and stuff. So Charlie Crist, I mean, maybe he's Italian or whatever, I don't know, but I guess we found out Marco Rubio is also Italian today. So
Yeah.
this is the kind of weird world of this kind of MAGA politics and stuff, is that it kind of has enabled people like Marco Rubio to promote themselves on the basis of bashing their, as much as he had this beautiful speech about his ancestors in Spain and Italy that was kind of a positive reclaiming of that. He also has benefited immensely from bashing people from Spanish speaking countries and calling for border control and restriction and stuff, which conveniently nobody at the end there with the questions and answers and stuff, it was very much, oh great, I'm glad you've brought this, you care about Ukraine and what do you think about China, but it was not any pushback about your hardline rhetoric around migration. So I bet that is in the mind of all these European politicians, where that was funny to have like this Q&A at the end there,
Mhm.
when it was a lot of people in the audience there who were high-ranking officials who they could have had this in almost the style of a roundtable discussion, but instead it was him coming and getting almost interviewed and kind of getting pressed for his insight on these questions. So he gets to kind of speak for everybody and tell them kind of what they should think about this stuff. So I think these are kind of like the lackeys of the US in Europe. There are probably plenty of Europeans who don't give a damn about America, and don't care that we are the child of Europe and whatever. Likewise, plenty of Americans don't. They may have all this ancestral whatever. I mean, I think in the end, pan-Europeanism as this political thing is very strong and has been exercised to much of the world. The majority of the world has suffered immensely from this. But I think that this was very romantic. And I think, young people in Europe, especially as you're having people grow up in Europe who are not themselves biologically European or Caucasian or whatever, are not like, sympathetic to all this bluster about our common
heritage,
musical traditions and stuff. So right. I imagine that there's, just like how here, people are pushing back against ICE and border control, and kind of, again, I think it's important that they avoid ever kind of having their own. And I think this is where we're kind of ending off with talking about Haiti and how all this speech does connect, where Haiti is kind of the birthplace of the movement that itself would centuries later, push Marco Rubio and his parasitic family out, and they have to go, be
Servants of the empire.
empire in Miami. That all kind of began with Haiti, and then later on, the different iterations of Cuba's revolutions and Venezuela's revolutions and stuff. So the arch enemy that isn't mentioned but is kind of there in the shadows is Haiti, behind Venezuela, behind Cuba. Of course, China's there too as kind of another global superpower enemy, but Haiti really ends up being kind of the progenitor of, the antithesis of all this, his vision of the Americas. It reminds me of like Jose Marti, Nuestra America, that there is this other vision for America that isn't about needing to say we are the new world and we have this manifest destiny and God allowed us to kill people and take their land. So yeah, I think the audience was very receptive and clapping and stuff, but even as you referenced Mark Carney, people may be aware that this enterprise is a common ruin in the end for everybody involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and which in the beginning of his speech, he says, let's not surrender to despair and to hand-wringing. We can make the American-European alliance great again.
Yeah.
Miega, I guess we could call it. Miaga.
Yeah.
So, in any case, an historic speech. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of ink and a lot of YouTube videos about it. So you got the Haiti Liberté one here tonight, this afternoon. And we'll be back to more focus on Haiti and not just its enemies next week. And we'll see what the developments are. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks.